Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. This is the show where I take a look at every classic Doctor Who story, plus a bunch of big finish audio dramas, one episode a day, 7 days a week. Now, before we begin, because in 2019, YouTube was caught data mining the information of underage users, therefore violating the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, also known as COPPA, they reached a settlement with the United States government where they implemented new policy meant to dodge responsibility and scapegoat creators. Meaning I have to ensure everybody understands that this video is not meant for children. It is not marketed towards kids, it is not advertised towards kids. Doctor Who is a family show that kids can watch, but this video, as with all the videos on my channel, are looking at the show from an adult perspective. And therefore, adult themes will be discussed, so viewer discretion is advised. It is the 16th of February, 2021, and we are starting the Sixth Doctor's era, meaning we've made it to the Sixth Doctor, meaning that we are only one Doctor away from the end of the classic show. Of course, the Sixth Doctor's era starts with the Twin Dilemma, and today we're starting with part 1. Good place to start. So there are a lot of thoughts on episode 1 of the Twin Dilemma. And not a lot of them are good. Now, the first thing to get out of the way, I think, is actually the title sequence. Yeah, we have a new title sequence now that we have a new Doctor. And honestly, of the 3 Starfield title sequences, I think Colin Baker's is the best. Adding in that extra, that sort of neon is very 1980s-esque, which, might have been a problem. But I think to the face of the Doctor that you see with it, and the smile Colin gives the camera, actually makes it work really, really well. And adding sort of the blue vortex near the end kind of makes it seem more like a time vortex than just space. It's a nice sort of throwback to the classic 70s title sequence. Sadly, after the title sequence, the quality takes a dip. A fairly big dip, to be completely honest. This entire story is, first episode especially, is very bad. This is, one notoriously bad for the image that I've obviously chosen as this episode's representation, but we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a minute, mainly because the opening scene is actually really annoying. So, at some point in the far future, we are never actually given explanation if it's from Earth or a different planet. There are these 2 twins, and these 2 twins, as we are told by their father, are geniuses. And apparently their genius could change the universe because math. Yeah, this kind of sounds like it wants to do, like, a Legopolis-style block transfer thing, but it doesn't have any of the skill required to actually pull that off. Like, there isn't anything clever about it. It's just, we have 2 smart kids, and then they are kidnapped by an old man played by Maurice Denham. Now, Maurice Denham is fine, but, like, these kids make all the same mistakes. Like, this guy goes into their house and they just talk to him and don't, like, demand he leave. Yeah, this is the future, and, you would think that stranger danger would still be a thing, but apparently it isn't. Like, these kids are complete idiots, and they're like teenagers. Like, that's how they're set up, as teenagers. So, like, you would think they'd have the common sense to be like, okay, we don't know who you are, so, please leave our house, because we don't know who you are, what you want, what you actually, what your goals are. Like, this is such a weird, it's a very, very weird sort of way to introduce a character. So they get kidnapped and shipped off to a planet, and they are pursued by space police. No, seriously, it's just police officers with, like, sort of a classic police uniform, but in space. You never actually... the twins are also called Romulus and Remus because allusions to the beginning of the Roman Empire, I guess. Yeah, that doesn't actually have any bearing on their characters. It doesn't give us any insight. The twins don't actually have any character. They're just sort of there. Neither does the space police. And you have Edgeworth talking with Mester, who is a giant slug. So the villain of this story is a giant slug, which is not greatly realized. The costume looks really cheap. A lot of this story looks really cheap. The sets outside of the TARDIS look cheap, which, doesn't help matters when you're telling a story. And I would, you may be wondering why I've spent so much time without talking about the Doctor and Peri. Well, because they don't actually do much. Like, the entire episode happens, by the end of they rescue a space police member who was at a crash, and bring him to the TARDIS, and he threatens to shoot them, and that's the cliffhanger. It's a danger cliffhanger, and it's so weird. A lot of this first episode is really the Doctor picks out clothes, which we'll talk about that costume, and then strangles Peri. Yeah, that scene goes down in infamy, and the scene's at least played to be sinister, but also the Doctor is still supposed to be the Doctor. Like, it's a very, very weird, a very, very weird scene, and a scene that really needed another rewrite or two to make it work. Like, he just does it out of the blue because her name sounds like a Peri, which is a fairy from Persian mythology that at one point before it became good was evil. So Peri's an alien spy and she must be stopped. Yeah, the logic there doesn't make any sense. Like, it's bad logic. And of course the Doctor picks out his costume, and now I don't hate the costume. It's tasteless and was not what the show needed, but I mean, it at least is memorable, much more so than Davison's cricketer's uniform. That was kind of boring. Like, you can at least enjoy looking at the dumb decision. But I will say, Colin Baker makes a first impression. And I will say he's clearly having fun with the role when he's not strangling Peri, or being like their playful banter with a couple more rewrites, and with Colin Baker and Nicola Bryant having okay chemistry for their first episode can actually work, and that is what it will eventually evolve to. But here it's just mean. So, and the direction is also really, really flat. It's Peter Moffat directing, I think, his last. No, he directs one more. Directing a story. So yeah, I'm gonna have to give part 1 of the Twin Dilemma a 1 out of 10. It's not saying Necromantia bad, but it is very close. All right, it is the 17th of February, 2021. I just finished watching part 2 of the Twin Dilemma. Yeah, this episode doesn't exactly improve things. The Sixth Doctor and Peri are just bickering their way through things, and this is an episode where it takes until about nearly 3/4 of the way through for the Doctor and Peri to actually do something important to the plot, and that's actually just get captured. No, seriously, they just get captured, which is, this is a problem, and it's actually going to be a problem that, that's going to continue for a decent amount of Colin Baker's era as the Doctor, which is weird. This is one of those things where you have this is one of those things where you have the entire story be all about having the Doctor be there, be there as sort of this present character,
it's it's this very different sort of story where you don't have it be intentionally the best thing ever, and it's not even trying to do anything interesting really. This just needed to be a competent story really, and it isn't. Like the two like the two characters um who are there are are two twins. They try to escape, they don't. The doctor disarms Hugo, the police officer, who's played by Kevin McNally of all people. Um, yeah, so you have someone who's would eventually get a career in actual bigger films here in this really bad episode of Doctor Who. Um, it's this um, it's this absolutely weird sort of thing where you have everything be um uh uh where everything is this um there's it's this very very weird sort of thing where um 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 it's just this really really different sort of story where you have everything where the plot is meant to be um, this sort of idea, and you have this big reveal that Edgeworth is actually Asmael, who is apparently a tutor of the Doctor's, that just comes out of nowhere. The idea is that he's the Hermit from the from those third Doctor stories, except that character already appeared in Planet of the Spiders. Like, yeah, this is just it's not great. Um, so overall, overall, um, you know, it's just really really weak. With poor direction, so I'm gonna give part two of the Twin Dilemma another 1 out of 10.
All right, it is the 18th of February 2021. I just finished watching part 3 of the Twin Dilemma. This is just this one's actually slightly better, mainly because things actually happen in part 3 of the Twin Dilemma. Now, that isn't to say this is at all a good episode. It's still a very, very weak start for the Fifth Doctor in general, and sadly making it look like this might just be a really, really, a really, really weak story overall, and just one that doesn't actually do anything interesting. It's this very, very, you have a bunch of crazy science of essentially Mestor having Asmael decide to take some planets and put them into Jakanda's orbit for the gain of what's implied to be just so his eggs can survive, which is, kind of dumb and silly, and I don't think anyone watching this think that's actually a smart plan. I mean, Mestor is totally evil, and in this episode you get a scene where he kills one of his own people. Shock and horror, except not really, because we all kind of saw that coming. It's really hard not to see something like that coming when, that's what the story is doing. It's a very, very messy sort of plot, where you don't get to see everything come to any sort of good conclusion. You're just hoping that it comes to a conclusion. Any sort of conclusion that it can come to would at least mean that, okay, you got to see something interesting and something great. This is just this is, as it stands, this is just the third episode in a serial that you at least get something good, and you at least get a little interesting stuff out of it, and I do mean there is some interesting stuff here. Mainly Colin Baker and Nicola Bryant's performance is actually starting to jive together and work out, not quite well, but better than they started, which I think is good. And, at least it means that, there is hope for this team, and, this TARS team isn't going to be a complete failure, because they have a very, some very different sort of things that the story wants to do around, even if it doesn't actually give us the full conclusion. It's here we have, the Doctor and Peri together, having at least a little time together to play around with who they are, what they mean. It's not the matter of being a perfect story, and it doesn't have to be, but it at least gives them something to do. The Doctor's overacting in his confrontation of Asmael is also great. It's so over the top, it's at least fun. And that's kind of something that this story needed. It needed at least a little bit of fun here, because up until this point, there wasn't anything fun. It was just building on this whole theme of, okay, we're moving the story along and barely making it to an end point. The actual cliffhanger isn't great, and though there is some attempt at world building, and the direction is more tolerable than it has been. Peter Moffat, again, isn't a great director, but some of the location work is competent and decent, and that's, you know, that's high praise considering the standards of this episode. I think it's interesting actually to talk about the writer Anthony Stephen, who only ever wrote this for Doctor Who, though he had a big career in television, so he would have been a big name for Doctor Who to get, but I don't think he actually understood Doctor Who in the way that, you know, what Doctor Who is and does, and how a Doctor Who story functions as a story, because yeah, this is a story where Doctor Who doesn't really function as a story. It's more of, okay, here are a couple of bits and things that the story is going to try to be, and move around and you know, not actually play around with. He also even had some trouble with the script, so I imagine a lot of this, there's a lot of this that feels like Eric Sayward was involved, and you can kind of tell because, you know, there's sort of that style of dialogue, and that sort of thing, but there's at least you have the Doctor as a character here. Like, at least he is written as a character and gets things to do. So overall, I'm going to have to give part 3 of the Twin Dilemma a 2 out of 10, which raises it up slightly, but it's still not great. Alright, it is the 19th of February, 2021. I just finished listening to part 4 of the Twin Dilemma. Watching part 4 of the Twin Dilemma. This is a TV story. I'm awake. This should give you an idea of how not good the Twin Dilemma is. Like, really, you can kind of tell how bad it is just by really how much the story doesn't work. Like, this is a story where you'd think that after everything that the characters go through, you'd get something, but you don't. You barely get anything for what you're doing with the story. It's like Peri and Hugo have this, not quite a subplot, but it's the closest thing that I could actually call it that, because this is this is a story where you don't actually get to see the story in any sort of ending. It's really more of just a, here's what we're doing. And with that, I don't know why this story was written like this, especially because, well, I mean, I know that at least it was a decent idea to give the Sixth Doctor something at the end of season 21, a full story to at least let him get introduced to the audience, get this new Doctor something instead of having to wait like 9 months, I think, was the standard gap between seasons at the time, which is just, not, that's not necessarily, that's not necessarily a bad thing. You could have done this with a story kind of like this, but it's one where, this is a story where you don't actually get to, give us something new or exciting. It's just here's all our characters here's all of our characters not telling us anything, not doing things that are different. It's just a story that is there. And I don't think this is at all what anyone was trying to go for. This is a story where things that the story almost wants to be, but can't be, simply because there's not enough money, and like a lot of the actual plot is immediately wrapped up with like the Doctor not even factoring into the conclusion. Like, it's all Asmael is doing. Like, the Doctor doesn't technically need to be there. There's this very different sort of idea where you don't see what the story wants to be, or what it can be. It's this very, very weird sort of thing where you don't know quite, here's what our conclusion is. It's not a very, very different sort of story. It's basically, they took some inspiration from Return of the Jedi, with the whole gastropod thing, and which would have been released like 2 years earlier, and basically we're like, okay, we take that, we try to do a Doctor Who story kind of like that, but like they don't. It's actually just a weird sort of thing where you don't have everything that the story wants to be. It's just it's right there, and not really something it's not really something where you get a different thing. You get you don't get the entire story. It's this very, very different sort of story where you don't get to see quite what it wants to be, and we just sort of end with honestly a decent line, and that's kind of really the only reason I can give this a 2 out of 10, because Colin Baker is nice, and he's actually in the role, and it ends on at least a line to make you kind of want to come back. I am the doctor, whether you like it or not. And there's this nice quick shot to Peri back to him, and they're both smiling at each other, kind of subtly indicating that no, they're still friends. They're not hating each other. But yeah, I have to give part 4 of the Twin Dilemma a 2 out of 10, because this is just not a good story. So we added the scores and averaged them out to give the Twin Dilemma a final score of 1.5 out of 10, starting the Sixth Doctor's run of stories with a very low mark. Thank you, everybody, for bearing with me with this episode of the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon, as it is frustrating. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. And join me next time when we move on to the 22nd season of Doctor Who, and the first of Colin Baker's 2 full seasons with Attack of the Cybermen.